Okay, so thank you for being here. I appreciate your attendance and your patience with our delays this morning. Um, and we have with us Irene Glendinning from the UK, who's going to be giving a discussion on the topic of academic integrity. I'm sorry, I've just lost my page here that I had, but the topic is institution-wide approaches to academic integrity, working with colleagues and students. So I would like to say more about the topic, but since we're a little bit late starting, I think I will just let Irene get right into the discussion. So I'll turn it over to Irene. So we'll have a discussion, and then there'll be a little bit of time afterwards for some question and answers. Thank you, Irene.
Thank you, Sylvia. And in fact, I've got a slightly different title to the one that's on the link. So I hope you're not too disappointed by the topic. It's very similar, but it's slightly different. So I'm just going to share my screen with you all. And I do want some interaction, so it isn't just me talking. Can you all see that? I hope you can. Let me just see if I can see you as well at the same time. So I'm just trying to, that's it. Yeah, great. So I can see you all now. That's brilliant. Okay, well, this is a great pleasure to have been asked to present this webinar, and it's really lovely to see you. I guess it's morning for most of you, but maybe it is afternoon for me. And so just a little bit about me to start with. It's not about me, but I work at Coventry University in the UK, and I've worked there since 1990, very long time. And my current role is academic integrity lead at the university. So I coordinate and I oversee the academic conduct process and all things to do with it. So, and I've done a lot of research in this field and a lot of publications as well. So the talk I'm going to give today is based on a lot of the research that I've done, but it's also based on a lot of my experience as well. So I'm going to look at a holistic institutional approach. We're going to focus very much on deterrence rather than on other things, but I'm going to mention all the different parts of what we call academic conduct. And I'm going to introduce something to you called the student cheating spectrum, and we'll have a look at that and see what you think. And I'd be interested in some feedback on that. It's something that I've just been developing. I'm going to focus on how we address the skills deficits by students and how that can help us to increase the integrity within our institution. And also the other things, managing change and maintaining consistency. So my own institution, I lead the strategy within my institution on integrity. What we try to maintain is a consistent approach across the institution, and it's a very big institution that's geographically diverse. It's got campuses all over the place, both in the UK and external. But also it's diverse in terms of the things that we do. So maintaining a consistent approach is quite important in terms of the fairness, but also about the student experience. And it's really difficult to maintain that because people, for all sorts of very good reasons, want to do things differently. So it's like herding cats, as the expression goes. But I try to do it. But if I can't actually make people follow the same procedures, which is very hard, I can at least insist that the student experience should be the same across the institution, and that's the important thing. I've developed a huge amount of guidance because when I started to take the lead on this role, which is about 5 years ago, the only guidance we had really, there was some guidance notes, but there was some our regulations, which is the Bible that we all have to follow, is completely cryptic, very difficult to read, very difficult to follow, really in very legalistic language. And I don't have control of that document, so I cannot change it. I can add minor changes to it, but what I really wanted to do was to throw it out, have a big bonfire and start again with a blank sheet, and I wasn't able to do that. So instead I developed a handbook, which is quite large, supported by some guidance notes, and but the guidance notes are really tricky to keep up to date because things move very often. I've got lots of guidance notes for staff and students. What challenges me about that is where to put them so that people can find them, and that continues to be a challenge. The new strategy is what we call an education-led approach, and hopefully that will become clear as we go through the talk. I chair a steering group. We've always had a steering group, right from when we moved to the current regime back in 2010, and I was part of the group that actually put in place the current procedures, and it's had a few minor reviews in the meantime, but I started the last review in 2019, just before the pandemic hit us, and so that's when we adopted this education-led approach, which I'll talk a bit more about later. So the steering group that I monitor now reports into our Quality in Learning and Teaching Committee, which in turn reports directly to the academic board. So once a year I have to present an annual report on academic conduct to our academic board, and last year was the first year that they were really interested in what I had to say, and that's because of artificial intelligence. Suddenly everyone's interested in academic conduct because of AI, and I told them that I was really quite intrigued. They weren't interested in anything I had to say in previous years, but last year, yeah, definitely. So I've got an increasingly interested audience in terms of our senior leadership team. They still don't give me enough resources to run it, but I'm working on that. The other thing that I discovered when we did the review is that the different parts of our university group were maintaining statistics in different ways. So the data that they were collecting was completely different across different parts of the group. So when I tried to do an analysis of it, it was a nightmare. And it's still not right. So I'm just getting statistics now for last academic year. And I've already found quite a lot of missing data and anomalies in there. They're all using the same template, but they haven't all completed it properly. So we're working on that. And one of my big things is working with students. I think students are a part of, essential part of this process. And if we don't work with them and we don't listen to them, then we're missing out on a really important trig. So that's the kind of overview of my institution's approach. Now, I've just recently developed this. I'm just constantly living with integrity and living with academic conduct. So I'm constantly thinking of new ways to portray it and depict it and work on it. So this is featuring in a new chapter that I've been working on. And I managed to find 4 Ds, which is brilliant. I'm going to focus on deterring, but I'll just say a little bit about the others. So I've divided the kind of whole process into deterrence, detecting, so deterring misconduct, detecting cases of misconduct, deciding what to do about them, and then documenting the process. And those 4 things are all very important part of it, but I'm going to focus today just on the deterring side of it. So in terms of deterring, I've broken it into 5 different things. So education and training is a really perhaps the important part of deterring, and it's not just about education for students and training for students, it's about staff as well. Everybody involved, and really, believe me, everybody in the institution has a stake in integrity. So education and training is fundamental. Also, pedagogy, assessment design, how the assessments are designed and how the kind of teaching and learning takes place within the institution can make a huge difference to whether or not students have the opportunities to breach misconduct. I'm trying to use positive language. I sometimes talk about cheating and I sometimes talk about misconduct, but we need to think about the words that we use, because academic integrity breaches are not always misconduct and they're not always dishonest. So if we talk about breaches like plagiarism being dishonesty, then we're not always being accurate, because sometimes it's very much about students not understanding. So how we teach, how we assess, and how we communicate with students is a really important part of the deterrence. So communicating is the next one. Use of technology, and we can use technology in both education and training. We can use it in pedagogy, but we can also use it as a deterrent, where students know we're going to be able to find particularly plagiarism, but other things. So we can use technology in lots of different ways. Detecting is one of these elements in its own right, but it's also a very important part of the deterrence, because if we don't detect cases and if we don't deal with those cases appropriately, then students will think we don't care. Students will think it's okay, you can do these things, it doesn't matter, nobody cares about it, nobody's going to find it. And therefore detecting is a very important part of deterrence. Now we'll kind of return to that in a few minutes. So I want to just broaden out a little bit and talk about what we mean by integrity and what we mean by breaches of integrity particularly. And I don't know whether some of you are aware that I was involved with two colleagues, with my colleague Stella and also Andrew King, both from the university. The three of us were involved in a project that we did for the Council for Higher Education Accreditation, which is based in Washington, DC. And they were interested in corruption in education, but they were interested in what quality assurance bodies and accreditation agencies are doing about corruption in higher education particularly. And what we discovered in that project is lots of different types of educational corruption. I know we're talking about integrity here rather than corruption, but there are synergies here, and it's quite important that we think about these, because it's not just about what students do. We found examples of corruption in institutional governance at the top level. We found, in fact, even beyond that, we found really terrible instances of corruption in the accreditation agencies themselves. We certainly found lots of examples of corruption in staff, recruiting staff, promoting staff, all of those things, particularly things like nepotism, favoritism, putting in place impossible barriers for people to get promotion, all of those things. In student recruitment and admission, and this is something that often gets forgotten, if you admit students to your institution that don't have the skills to succeed, then they are more vulnerable to breaching integrity than students that are well equipped when they arrive. And there are systematic ways that recruitment gets corrupted, and there are systematic ways of corruption in recruitment that you can have some control of if you're aware of it. So that is a really important part of this that you need to be aware of. In terms of teaching, learning at all levels, it's really quite important that students get the right kind of skills. And there are really fundamental ways of corrupting the teaching and learning process. And particularly because teaching staff, but also administrative staff have so in terms of the teaching and learning, it's very easy to kind of ask for a bribe from a student in order to change a mark. And it's very hard to find that kind of corruption, but it does happen quite considerably in some parts of the world. And you might be quite shocked by that, but believe me, we've come across a lot of cases of that. It's really hard to find. But there are other more subtle ways of corrupting it, like insisting a student has to buy your textbook in order to pass the course, those kind of things. Lots of things like that to do with teaching and learning. And as I say, it can happen at any level. Also things like sexual harassment of students and demanding sexual favours in order to change a mark and get a higher mark, those kind of things. So lots of things like that. Student assessment is the thing that we're going to focus on most, so I won't say too much about that because that gets a lot of attention. Credentials and qualifications, well, we know that it's very easy to claim that you've got a degree or a certain qualification, or claim that your degree is higher rated than it actually is. How many people check? People fake their CVs. So checking those things is really quite important. There are ways that those and also fake degrees and fake universities all of those things. So that also affects student recruitment, because students can claim they've got qualifications to come in for postgraduate degrees that they haven't got, all of those kind of things. So those are things that you need to remain very much aware of, types of corruption that can then affect the integrity of the institution. And scholarly research and academic publishing, I lead one of the two of the working groups for the European network, one on ethical publishing and dissemination, and I co-lead with Serie the working group on policies, academic integrity policies. And so I'm very interested in scholarly research and publishing and the kinds of corruptions that go on in that area. We started off when we started the ethical publishing working group, we were looking at predatory publishing. That is, these fake journals that set up and don't do any peer review, and they pretend to be academic journals, but they don't have the quality. But it's a much broader field than that. So if anyone is interested in joining either of those working groups, contact me later, and happy to talk to you. But there's lots of, as you probably were, lots of examples of corruption and misconduct within the kind of research and ethical misconduct as well within those fields. So when you're looking at institution-wide, you need to look at everything, and you need to look at all the different functions within the institution, because there is, there need to be integrity safeguards everywhere. There are other types of, I thought I'd just share with you what we mean by breaches of academic and research misconduct. So the typical ones that we look at are plagiarism, self-plagiarism, collusion, other kinds of sharing, and that could be sharing using sharing websites, those kind of things. Contract cheating, and what I mean by that is the students handing in work they didn't do themselves, that they got somebody else to do. Could be an essay mill, could be a family member, could be a student. Misuse of artificial intelligence, which is the big one at the moment that everyone is interested in. And that it's important to realise that we're not banning students from using artificial intelligence, certainly not in my institution. We can't ban them, but they need to understand what tools they can use and for what purpose, and not use them for purposes that they're not allowed to use them for. Bribery, attempted bribery or proven bribery, fabrication, falsification, deception, misrepresentation, and that could be something as simple as handing in a doctor's note that's been faked, pretending they've had a problem when they haven't. But it could be misrepresenting something that they've done. Overriding ethical approval or not applying for ethical approval for research. Data security breaches, that's a big one really, where you might not see that as an academic integrity breach, but it really is. And then all different types of exam cheating, and those have expanded because now we're doing a lot more online exams. So my own institution, I didn't put this one in, but my own institution has a type of integrity breach that is closing a webcam when they're supposed to be leaving it open, or doing those kind of things. So where students are supposed to be observed, and they oh dear, my webcam stopped working, you can't see what I'm doing now, those kind of things. Other types of cheating, like prior sight of exam paper, and lots of other things. So and I just want to focus in on essay mills and contract cheating, because I think this is a big one, and I don't know whether anyone in this call thinks it doesn't apply to my institution, we don't have that, my students don't do that. If you really think that is true, you're probably not looking hard enough. So it's not about essay mills, it's about any kind of work. It's also about things like impersonation, getting somebody else to sit your exam for you. And anyone can do it, it's not just essay mills either. In England, not in the whole of the UK, but in England, we actually have legislation now that makes it illegal for anyone to run an essay mill or a kind of one of these tutoring services within the UK that offers to do students' work for them. But it's not very well implemented. It really is in its infancy, and a lot more work needs to be done on that to make it work properly. But it's also illegal for anyone to advertise essay mills. That doesn't stop our students getting bombarded with emails from these essay mills and so on. And I get a lot of students contacting me saying, can you stop this? We have difficulty doing that, but I'm sure we could do more if we tried. It's very cheap, it doesn't cost a lot of money. And also you can get really fast turnaround. And I see a lot of, I get a lot of emails from essay mills who tell me that your student's been using my services, but they haven't paid me. So I get all the whistleblowing essay mail emails, and I have to kind of deal with those and work out whether there's a case to follow up on them. Generally we do, and most of the cases do end up leading to students being facing allegations. But there are other types of misconduct, and some of these I've talked about already in that bigger piece, really. Credential fraud, misuse of funding, that could be research funding, or it could be funding for the institution itself, bullying, harassment, extortion, blackmail, neglect of responsibilities. So I've just been reading about exactly that kind of case today. Somebody sent me some details where staff have been absent without leave and have just neglected the responsibilities, perhaps got their PhD students to do their teaching duties for them, all of those kind of things. So there are lots of things. Unauthorized access to exams, where it might be that the teacher leaks the exams, or it could be that the student hacks into the system and has a prior look at the closed book exams and things like that. So there's lots of other things. Altering student records is another one that comes up every so often. It's very unusual, but it does happen occasionally. So there's lots of other things there. And these probably you wouldn't call most of these academic misconduct, you'd call them disciplinary cases or whatever your local term is. Nevertheless, they need to be considered, and there also need to be kind of risk assessments in terms of how you stop these things happening. So I've got a little bit of a job for you now. I want you to use the chat. I hope you can all use the chat and access it. I want you to put in the chat what you think are the main reasons for students breaching integrity. And particularly I'm looking at academic integrity, but it could be other sorts of integrity now. So put in the chat what you think are the main reasons. I'm going to come back to this in a couple of slides' time with my take on that, but I'm really interested to see for you to kind of engage in that. So I'm going to carry on with the slides in the next slide, but please put your ideas in the chat for that while I go on to the next slide. So I'm going to talk what I see as being the current challenges to standards and quality in institutions. And I would say plagiarism is still the most common type of integrity breach, in my view, based on the data that I've got access to for my own institution and for other institutions as well. So, but plagiarism is something we can control, and we can detect plagiarism, although students try to disguise plagiarism sometimes, or they don't understand that it's wrong. So, and that's where education comes in. But I still see the greatest threat is contract cheating. It's very much ghostwriters, essay mails, impersonators, all of those kind of takes on contract cheating. And it's the greatest threat simply because it's very hard to detect it. And even if you detect it and you strongly suspect that it's happening, it's very hard to produce really good evidence that can stand up to scrutiny. So that's why that is a big threat, and that's why there should be a lot of focus on that, because it's very easy to just ignore it and pretend that it's not there. Students are bombarded with invitations from essay mills and file sharing sites and offered all sorts of offers to do that. But once they start using them, it's very difficult for them to stop. But also, essay mills are already using artificial intelligence tools in order to kind of refine the work they're doing or generate in the first place. So, there's a strong connection there between artificial intelligence and essay mills. And, there is a blurred line between the two. So you need to look at both of those things. So you might think the student hasn't done the work themselves, and it could be an essay mill, could be another student, or it could be an AI that they've used. There are also agents that helps to recruit students, and they get paid for doing that. So these are recruitment agents, and they help students to fake their entry qualifications and to get entry into universities. And once they've got into universities using fake qualifications, it might be their language that's been faked, or it could be the whole of the qualifications, then because they don't have the necessary skills to succeed, these students have to use essay mills facilitated by the agent throughout the student journey. And these are the students that we really need to find, and we need to throw those out as soon as we find them. But it's hard. It's really hard to do that because of all the reasons I mentioned already. The big elephant in the room, of course, is artificial intelligence. So paraphrasing. So it's not just ChatGPT, and I get quite cross when people just talk about ChatGPT, although people wake up and they know what you're talking about. It's also about all sorts of other things like paraphrasing tools, translation software, and what I've called generative AI tools. It's not just about text, it's about everything else that they can generate, like graphics, they can do computer code, they can generate music, whatever you want. There are generative AI tools that can do that, PowerPoints, everything. They can do everything, specialized tools that can do that. So students using these tools, thinking it's okay and they will get away with it because it's hard to detect, is a big threat. And we need to address those, but we need to be very clear with students what they are allowed to use them for, because we can't ban these tools, they're just out there. And so what we need to do is be very clear to students, communicate with students, guide them, advise them, teach them to use these tools in the correct way, in an ethical way, and not to use the tools in a way that would bypass the work that you want them to do and the demonstration of the skills that you're teaching them. But other challenges, so that's kind of focusing very much on what students do, but actually the failure to detect serious forms of misconduct is another threat. Because if you don't, as I said earlier, if you don't detect these serious forms, these students will end up graduating. And these students will go out into the world without the skills that their degree says they have. And therefore, these students will end up in a position potentially of danger to their patients or their public, if it's a kind of medical or it's an engineering type of job. But also they will taint the reputation of your institution if you've got students graduating that don't have the right kind of skills. Another kind of challenge and threat is complacency, denial, ignoring problems. And that can happen at all levels. It can happen at the high level of the institution, the senior leadership team. It can happen at the kind of management level, and it can happen at the academic level. Ignoring problems and not adequately resourcing any initiatives that are provided, systems and processes. So those are challenges, and they're challenges I face every day, and they're perhaps challenges that you face. And these are things that the institution could do something about. But you need to be aware of what those challenges are. So I'm going to have a look now at the chat and see what you've put. Yeah. So yeah, so we've got lots of agreements. So a lack of understanding about expectations, interplay, second language problems. Yeah, poor time management is a big one, isn't it? Okay. Motivations for being not always about learning, stress, and so on. Yeah. And the interesting thing, grades, survive, not enough time to do the work. All of these, poor time management. Yeah, great stuff. That's brilliant. So thanks for contributing to that. So this is my take on it. And there are things here that we can control, and there are things here that are harder to control. So first one is, and this is from research that I've been involved in. We did research in 38 countries. We asked the same questions to this same question. It's actually in the PUPP survey, is this one. But we asked the same questions to staff, to kind of teaching staff and to students, and we got different priorities depending on who you're asking. So the first one is opportunity, things like cutting and pasting. It's easy to do. There are no consequences. They don't believe the lecturer cares. So they can see enough. And in some cases, they know the lecturer doesn't care, so they can just get away with it. Next one is expediency. So this is panic. They run out of time, can't manage their workload, and quite a few of you picked up on that one. Or they think their own work is not good enough to pass, so they're using work of somebody else because they think they'll get a higher mark if they do that. Skills, they can't express another person's ideas, they don't know how to use sources, they think the task is completely beyond their capability, they can't read or comprehend, maybe to do language skills and so on. They're not aware of the penalties and consequences, they have never been told it's wrong, they've got away with it before and they didn't think it was wrong. They confuse group working and collusion. They don't really understand how to work on their own. They're tempted by offers for help, and they don't understand that will be picked up, and that is wrong. And finally is attitude. Think it won't be detected. They just want to pass. They're not really there to learn. They just want to get a degree. They've got other priorities. They're lazy. Cheating sort of seems wrong. And in terms of helping other students cheat and otherwise, they value loyalty above integrity. So if somebody asks for help, somebody offers help, then they will follow the loyal path rather than the integrity path. So those kind of things. So which of these reasons can we influence? And that really, in terms of designing policies, you need to think about all the reasons and think about which of these we can influence. The difference in the research between staff and students' responses is that the staff tended to choose the things like run-up time, student attitudes, lazy, those kind of things, whereas students tended to focus on the skills. So, students are saying we didn't. It's hard to understand what we're being asked to do. We didn't know how to reference all of these things. Whereas the staff thought it was all about students misbehaving. So there's a disconnect there between staff and students' views. So it's worth thinking about that and actually looking. And it did vary from country to country, because we've surveyed 38 countries and we've seen different patterns in different countries. So it's worth, in your own institution, asking those questions and finding out what is that pattern in my own institution, and therefore what should I focus on? What are the things I can do? What can I influence, and in what way can that help to reduce certainly the accidental breaches of integrity? But what can we do? So this is what I'm going to focus on next. So I've called it the student cheating spectrum. Which students breach integrity and why? And so I've actually said that the student population can be divided into three: those who would never knowingly breach integrity. And if they do breach integrity, so that first group, it's because they lack the skills, or they lack the knowledge, or there is some kind of mitigating circumstances why they would do it. In the middle group, and this is probably the largest group, but I don't know what these percentages are, but those open to persuasion, those that could go either way. So they could join the honest students, or they could join the black group at the end, where students who arrive with no intention of doing any work, and they're just going to cheat their way through at all costs, regardless of what initiatives you put in place. And I hope that black group is small, but that will vary according to the culture within the institution, and also the culture within the country as well, and the kind of geographically where they are. So I'm going to look at all of those three in turn. I'm going to start with the black, and I know, sorry, before I do that, so this is just a theory, this is just a thought. So those three, so we look at those three as percentages. So I've got a Y1, Y2, Y3 on the Y axis. So what I'm saying here is just a theory. Y1 is the number of students in that black group, the ones who would always breach integrity regardless. The blue group, I've said 70% of the students are in that blue group for this illustration. And then the honest students, I've said 20% of students would never ever breach, but I hope that's higher, but that's where we are. And so what I'm saying here is, if the percentage of actual breaches that we manage to detect and sanction, and as that goes from 0 to 100, the number of cases will drop, because the more students know that they're likely to be caught, the less likely that blue group is to cheat. So that's kind of, it might not be a smooth graph like that. It might be much sharper depending on the culture and depending on the kind of deterrence measures and so on that are taken. But it will never get above kind of 80%, because there's that group of 20%, and it will never get below 10%. So that was interesting. But also there is a tipping point where it's more likely than not that blue group of students will cheat, depending on, and it's going to depend on all sorts of other measures and deterrence and so on. So it's not quite as simple as I'm showing on that diagram, but I thought it was quite an interesting way to look at that. So I'm now going to look at the black group. So how do we stop this black group from from breaching integrity. Put in place strict checks on admission to make sure you don't admit unqualified students. So it might be something like a diagnostic test when they arrive. Make it easy for tutors and other staff to report their suspicions. Train tutors on what to look for and how to evidence misconduct. Encourage and protect whistleblowers, and that could be students or staff, to report cases of misconduct. Set up robust sanctions for serious forms of misconduct, ultimately throwing them out if they keep on doing it. And that's why you need to keep records, because you don't know if it's serial cheating unless you keep records. And certainly expel a student if they keep on doing it. So those are my thoughts on those intent, but try not to admit them in the first place is the issue with that one. But that's easier said than done. How do we deal with those open to persuasion? So, well, they are likely to respond to the prevailing culture in the institution for a start off. So if they see other students cheating, they are more likely to cheat. Some will be encouraged to cheat if they think they can get away with it. If they can see other students benefiting, that will encourage them to do it. They certainly will resort to cheating if they run out of time, poor management skills. So teaching management skills is, time management skills is really quite an important part of it. They have no idea what's expected of them, so you need to tell them that, you need to communicate that with them. And that's really about the kind of education-led approach really, because if they don't know what integrity is about, if they don't know what you expect of them, then they're likely to make mistakes. Certainly teach them about academic sources, paraphrasing, use of sources. They might have financial pressures that force them to work long hours to make it, it's possible to help with those kind of things. They may have caring family responsibilities that reduce their time that they can study. So if you're aware of all these things, you can put in place measures to help those students to ease their journey. They may believe it's okay to get someone else or something else to do the work for them. So it's kind of making all those things clear. So the final group then, and this applies to everyone, provide access to training and education for everybody. Develop a knowledge bank of materials that you can customize for particular subjects and disciplines, and employ specialist support to help develop skills, because some academic staff think it's not their job to teach these things. No, I'm here to teach engineering. I don't know anything about academic writing, can't do any of that stuff. So training staff to help to develop their skills so that they can actually apply these things to their own discipline, put it in context for the students so they realize the relevance of it for their particular course. Work with honest students to help them to support a culture of integrity to reduce cases of misconduct, because it's actually a complete waste of the resources to do that. So what are all these things that you need to train students on? Well, I started to think about that and I came up with these 6 themes. And if you have other ideas and other thoughts on this, just I'd be really interested to hear from you, but I color-coded them. So there are 6 colors and 6 themes here. Study and assessment skills, writing and referencing skills, academic research integrity, creativity, research skills, preparing for future work and study. Those are the topics. So that I then broke down each of those 6 topics into more topics, and I've actually added 3 more today. Here we go. So it was 25 and it's now 28. So I had a little play around with this one. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but there are, if anybody wants a copy of this, very happy to share the presentation. But there are lots of topics. When you start to think about it, you can't make the assumption that any student arrives at your university or college with these skills, no matter what level they're at. And I'm talking about students coming in on PhD courses, and you just simply don't know whether students have got these skills, and if they have the skills, how much, whether their understanding is the same as yours. So this kind of content needs to go into the curriculum somewhere for every single student, and where it goes and how it's fitted in. It needs to go into the student journey, and it needs to be developed throughout the student journey. So when students arrive, they will get a taste of something, and then the skills will gradually be developed over time. Who delivers it? When it's delivered at what time will depend on when it's right for that student in terms of the curriculum and the assessment methods and so on. But you know, you can't, the students are not going to learn these things unless they are, you know, and they're going to have a much easier student journey if they're taught these things than if they just pick it up as they go along. So that's my take. And what I want to try to do in my own institution, this is a work in progress, is to take each one of these and sort of starting with the 6, but breaking down into the 28. Maybe I'll find 2 more, and then it'll be a nice kind of rectangle. But put some materials behind each of these boxes. Give someone the responsibility of maintaining that. Divide that between all the different expertise within the institution, but making those materials available for anyone to use and customize for their own use. And the way I've just started to do that is to put together, so that I'm just going to show you the 6 themes. So there is, with study and assessment skills, there is a group-wide university induction working group that helps students when they first arrive and before they arrive, for pre-induction and induction. They will have the responsibility of maintaining all the materials relating to those kind of green topics, the light green ones there. So those are the kind of things that go in there. The writing and referencing skills will be our librarians, our academic writing staff, and they already have a lot of materials, and they're responsible for maintaining those and making them available to everyone. Academic research integrity is my responsibility. I've got to talk about my team, but actually it's me and a lot of people that I ask to help me as and when I need it. So lots of things there that I have already developed, and more things I need to develop and make available. Creativity. This I think should be really the course directors. So that will go down to kind of course level, but they can also make those materials available to other courses and other people, and in a cross-disciplinary way. We've also got an online learning arm, so they also have lots of materials that can be used and reused. Research skills, doctoral college, but also course directors and other people. You see, it's a work in progress. It's not finished yet. There are other things to go in there. And preparing for work, future work and study. We have an employability unit that will be responsible for all of that, but also things like alumni networks and so on, and guest lecturers and people like that. So that is my thinking. It's not complete yet. So next, I'm almost at the end now. So this is education for academic integrity. So in my institution, the way that this education-led approach, the way that we did it was we thought in terms of 3 levels. There's the pre-arrival and induction arrival, when people first arrive, when the students first arrive at the university. So even before they get here, we have materials that are sent to them. They can do an online and some study online stuff. We often have students that arrive late because they have problems with visas. So while they're waiting to arrive and while they're waiting for their visas to be cleared, they can be working on materials and lots of things there. The purple hexagons are about the student journey. So throughout the student journey, right the way through the student journey, gradually developing all of those skills over time. So that they don't just learn things once, they will gradually develop and refine those skills, so that by the time they graduate, they've got a really good grasp of those skills. But it's challenging because it's where you fit those in the curriculum and within the student time, but they need to be taught somewhere. And then if things go wrong and the students come through the academic conduct process with an allegation of misconduct or a breach of academic integrity, to use a positive term, the green hexagons require the student to attend a workshop. And the workshops are run by our Centre for Academic Writing and our library staff, and they developed them and refined it recently. Students love those workshops, they're really great. We haven't managed to completely enforce it as a mandatory requirement because we didn't have the resources to do it initially. And we're looking for ways that we can make sure we track students and make sure they do it. If they come back again, they have to do a kind of one-to-one set up an action plan for what is it you're doing wrong, and how are you going to put that right, and support process and so on to do that. So that's my kind of vision for the education-led approach to integrity. So I'm just nearly at the end now. So this is the last slide, apart from the kind of references and tidying up at the end. So I quite like this diagram because it's visually telling you what I want to say for the first bullet point. So academic integrity underpins quality and standards. If you don't have integrity, you can't claim to be a high quality, high standard institution. So if you don't take care of integrity, then your quality and your standards will suffer. Everyone within a higher education institution, a college, everyone is responsible. It's not one person's job. It's not a group of people. It's everybody's job, and that goes right from the senior leadership team right down to the students. Everyone is responsible for academic integrity and for this culture of integrity within the institution. There needs to be ongoing communication and training, development of skills and so on, both for staff and students, and particularly in this day and age where we've got artificial intelligence. We know some staff are terrified of it, some staff just want to run with it, but we need to have an institutional approach that works, and we can't ignore integrity within that. So it's important that there's guidance provided for staff and students so that everyone knows where they stand. We need to focus on education first, because that's what we exist for. We like to use our students as partners where possible, but there are limits to what students can and should be involved in. And whatever the state of your current policies and process, you need to regularly review them to make sure they remain fit for purpose. And I think that's where I stop. So I've got some references there that sources I use in there. Unfortunately, they're all mine, things I've been involved in, but that's really what I was presenting here. And I thank you very much for your attention and for answering the question, your contributions. And I'm going to hand over, and we've time for a few questions. So thank you very much for listening and for staying with me, and I hope you're still awake.
Thank you, Irene. That was really instructive, very interesting. Thank you so much.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. So if anybody has any questions for Irene, comments, thank you for the chat contributions. Very good.
Okay, so there's a question there from Paul Dassman. I'm just interested here if we've interested in how libraries participated. Yeah, libraries are so important. Really important. We have subject librarians. I guess you do too, who have those kind of subject specialisms, and they're all, the librarians are really keen to get involved, and yeah, and as you say, it's about intellectual property as well. It's more than just teaching students how to cite and reference. They have a really important role to play in terms of how we use sources, why we use sources, and we're very fortunate at my institution to have a Centre for Academic Writing where we've got a lot of expertise in that, and they actually help. They co-teach, or they offer to co-teach with academic staff so that they can teach the kind of theory behind the academic writing stuff, and then the specialist lecturer will then contextualize that in terms of how that's applied within the discipline. And that's why I got very much involved with the Centre for Academic Writing, because as a subject expert in computer science, that's what I started to do, working with the academic writing tutors. So that's one of the ways, and they're really, really valuable. And I can see Josh has got his hand up. Josh, do you want to kind of open up your mic and chat if you're able to?
Sure, yeah. I had a question for you. So at the onset, you have the word deterring, and I was just going to ask you how you settled on that word, because we've seen different, frameworks, different organizations use different words at that level. Like the QAA, I think, uses prevention. We've seen the word reduction, and then Kiata Rundle out of Australia talks about why students just choose not to engage in it rather than it being prevented or being reduced to them being deterred. So I'm just wondering how you decided on that term.
I don't like the word prevention because we can't prevent it, because we can deter it. We can actually make it harder for students to cheat by setting some really nice assessments and that engage students. And but ultimately, if a student wants to cheat and they're determined to do so, they will do. So we're never going to be able to prevent it, and it will never be zero. And in my very, very early days involved in kind of plagiarism, which was in the early 2000s, there's a really lovely lady called Jude Carroll. If you've not come across Jude Carroll, look her up. She's really important. And she was my mentor, really. She taught me all I know, really, from an early stage. But she said that you're never going to stamp it out. You'll always have some underlying cases of misconduct, and anyone who thinks differently doesn't really realize the reality of it. So I think deterrence is a good word. Certainly I wouldn't use prevention. But the other, certainly reduction is another relevant word, because that's what you want to do. If you have a very high number of cases, and you continue to have a high number of cases, and the number of cases is going up, it probably suggests that you're not really catching very many cases. That's what that kind of little graph was that I was sharing with you. I'm still working on, there must be a better way to depict it than that. But anyway, that's because what I'm saying is, if the number of cases is still rising, the chances are that students in that middle kind of blue group are thinking, yeah, we're okay, we'll get away with it. And so if you put in place really strong measures to deter, and you are deterring, and one of those is detection. If you are, if you're not detecting, then that's you're missing out on that as well. But so if you are successfully deterring, then the number will start to go down, hopefully. And in my institution, I have to say, we've not kind of reached that tipping point yet in the graph. We're still slightly going up. Although in parts of my university, the cases are coming down, and that means that and they tend to be parts where they're really focusing in on those deterrence measures a lot more than other ones. So I'm seeing signs of that in my institution, but it's a really difficult. There's no one answer, and it is a hard job, but you need to put resources behind it. Any more questions? Or comments? Feel free to put up your hand and completely disagree with something I've said. It's quite okay to do that. I don't have all the answers.
I just want to make a comment. I really like your point that you emphasize that at all levels, from administrators to instructors to students, need to be involved and regularly on the issue of academic integrity, because I find that most institutions are developing a policy and then washing their hands of it and saying, we did our job, now you instructors have to go out and be the police of the students, and that's your job. And the instructors are feeling overworked and incapable, in some cases feeling incapable of detecting or dealing with the issues they face. They're not educated on it. They're overworked, like I said, very little time. And so that seems to be what's happening, at least here in Canada. I don't think it's an exception. I wonder if you have any ideas about how all these people at different levels of an institution could possibly be involved. Should there be someone dedicated, like your position, but more developed, like at an institution, to be an academic integrity officer or leader? What do you think?
Yeah, we have academic integrity officers, and recently we've refined that a little bit. So in each kind of discipline area, there is an academic integrity, what have we called them? A kind of lead academic conduct officer, right? So we've got and that person is responsible within their own discipline group of helping other staff, of guiding staff, of supporting them in terms of generating and leading the team of academic conduct officers as well. And they will do a kind of triaging process on the cases that come forward and advise whether they need to go any further. So that's part of it, I think. But the other thing is, I think it's important to realise why cases don't get reported, and I've just written a chapter on exactly that topic. I didn't include it in this because there were other things I wanted to include, and I couldn't put everything in. But if you think about all the reasons staff might not want to pursue a case. There are a lot of those reasons. Things like you might get a bad evaluation from the student if you do, and that might have impacts on your job. So if the institution understands what these disincentives are for reporting cases, and does something about it and removes the kind of side effects of other things they're doing. Like, so for example, in my institution, they have a policy of pass first time. So we want students to pass first time. We don't want you to fail anything. So if a lecturer has a high fail rate, which might be because of academic misconduct, that is seen as bad. So that lecturer is less inclined, potentially, to report cases because it will have an impact on their pass first time rate. So they'll be seen as a failing academic if they do that. So there are all sorts of things that are introduced for all very good reasons, but they can have unintended side effects. And so those are really quite important to think about. And if you have somebody to go back to your original question, if I could remember what it was, if you have somebody in that kind of leadership role, they will be in a position to have those conversations and make those influence those decisions and those policies. Because I have the reason I have lots of ideas is because I spend my whole life thinking about integrity. Sorry, you're muted, Sylvia.
Sorry, you're a wealth of resource, Irene, and I really thank you for sharing the information that you did today. I know you have a lot more you could share. I believe we're running out of time though, and some people I think might have to leave. So could we join together in thanking Irene for her very informative talk? Thank you so much. You can have your clap emoji if you like.
Pleasure, thank you very much for asking.
I really appreciate it.
And thanks everyone for participating.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, did you want to make the slides available?
Yes, I can do. If anybody wants the slides, I'm happy to share that. I'll send it to Natalie. And if
you could email Natalie at PUPP. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.